Hey, I'll see you on tour in Las Vegas, Chicago, and Grand Rapids. In Chicago, it's stand-up and a live panel show. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and make sure you go to jimmydore.com. So we have Max Blumenthal with us. You know, he's the award-winning journalist as well as the editor-in-chief and founder of the independent investigative news website, The Grayzone, which I gave a nice shout-out to on Joe Rogan, the #1 show in the world. And I had to really twist Aaron Mate's arm to thank me for that, which was it really hurt me. He's also the best-selling author of several books, including Goliath, The 51-Day War, and The Management of Savagery. It's Max Blumenthal. Hey, Max. So why? Hey,
Jimmy. Good to see you.
So here's why I have you on. So you reported this on October 27th, 2023. You said October 7 testimonies reveal Israel's military shelling Israel citizens with tanks and missiles. So on October 7th, you reported that it was the Israeli military that attacked their own people and their own soldiers, right? Okay.
Yes. And you know, followed up on this with several other reports that were way ahead of the Israeli media on the Israeli military killing Israeli citizens in large numbers on October 7th and doing so deliberately.
And so when you reported that at your website, The Grayzone, you got smeared by Haaretz, which is the Israeli newspaper, and it says masterclass in manipulation, exposing Max Blumenthal's lies about Israel on October 7th. The Grayzone editor has a history of denying war crimes, so it's no surprise he provided a piece that very selectively uses facts, includes purposely edited quotes to change their meaning, and grossly plays down their atrocities. Now, why is this important? Why do I bring this up? Well, here's one more. I'll show you why. You got smeared by the Washington Post. The Washington Post published not one, but 2 live-filled smears of us for helping expose the Hannibal Directive scandal. First by the anti-Palestinian neocon, what is it? Her name, Liz Dwoskin?
Liza
Dwoskin. I can't believe she would lie. Look how pretty she is. Pretty means innocence. I bet she just works with the security agencies teaching them breathing techniques and yoga. Come on. Nothing about deceiving her own people, right? Along with everyone else. You go, then by the mendacious CIA stenographer Joseph Men, who falsely insinuated Iran and Russia were directing our factual reporting while clamoring for the criminal prosecution of our editor, Wyatt Reed. Wow. Where's the accountability for these journalists? Well, there isn't going to be any. But why do I bring all this up, this old reporting of yours, and the fact that you were smeared for being accurate? Because now Haaretz is also echoing what your reporting said back in October. Now, after smearing you for months and months, now IDF ordered Hannibal Directive on October 7th to prevent Hamas taking soldiers captive. There was crazy hysteria and decisions started being made without verified information. Documents and testimonies obtained by Haaretz reveal the Hannibal Operational Order, which directs the use of force to prevent soldiers being taken into captivity, was employed at 3 army facilities infiltrated by Hamas, potentially endangering civilians as well. So what they did was, by the way, the best way to prevent your own soldiers from being captured is to kill them, obviously. That's what the Hannibal Directive is, and it invented in like 1986 after Hamas had captured some Israeli soldiers, and the soldiers didn't shoot at them because they didn't want to kill their own people. Well, then the Israelis, they were like, hey, go ahead, kill our own people. And that's called the Hannibal Directive. And not only did they kill their own soldiers, Max, they also killed their own civilians, correct?
Deliberately, because, you know, one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, who was captured in 2006, was exchanged 5 years later for 1,200 Palestinian prisoners, Palestinian captives. So for the Israelis, that's just politically devastating.
So they would rather slaughter their own soldiers and civilians. So here is a colonel from the IDF, and it's translated. This is what he says happened on October 7th. So this guy's name is Naf Erez,
Yeah.
He's an Israeli colonel. And he said it was a mass Hannibal, meaning the Hannibal Directive. It was a mass. It wasn't just they just killed a few. They killed mass of people. That's how I'm interpreting it. Is that how you interpret that?
Absolutely. And that's what was corroborated in this new Haaretz report, which I basically already reported back in October.
So here, I'll play this for you. This is an Israeli colonel. Here we go. What we saw here on October 7th was mass Hannibal. There were many openings in the fence, thousands of people in many different vehicles, with hostages and without. So this woman who survived the attacks has also accused the Israeli army of invoking the directive. They killed hostages. Hang on, let me back it up. He says, understand, they killed hostages. They were killed in the crossfire. Understand, there was very, very heavy crossfire. So our forces, the Israeli army, may have shot them. Undoubtedly, she says. Yes, undoubtedly. That's a survivor. When they tried to eliminate the abductors, Hamas, yes, they eliminated everyone, including the hostages. So the Israeli army just came in and wiped out everybody. Thousands of people in cars. That's why they buried all those cars. You remember we did that story? Where they buried the car, they buried them. Which is because what they're doing is they're covering up the evidence of a mass atrocity that was committed by the Israeli army. Here, I'll play a little bit more. Because there was okay. Their claims were reiterated by a British author and journalist, Jonathan Cook. The Hannibal Directive, enacted at the kibbutz, was likely to have been applied as policy towards Israeli civilians captured by Hamas and held hostages in their own homes inside Israel. The debate around whether Israel used the Hannibal Directive comes after accounts from witnesses indicated the army's role in the high death toll. So maybe that's why there was such a high death toll, because it wasn't Hamas that killed all those people. It was Israelis using Apache helicopters supplied by the United States. And reports emerged of Israeli military helicopters using artillery against civilians at the Nova Music Festival. These revelations counter the army's claims that Hamas was responsible. See, there's the cars. Hamas didn't have the ability to do that. That Hamas was responsible for the deaths of approximately 1,200 Israelis. Now we know that it was the Israeli army that was responsible for a large number of those people's deaths. Is there an estimate on how many people were killed by the Israeli army that day? How many of their own civilians and own members of their army? Is there an estimate?
There isn't, and I've been saying many. Haaretz falsely accused me of saying most, but based on Haaretz's latest report, which relies on army documents, interviews with officers who were active on that day, who were involved in the killing of their fellow Israelis, I would say it numbers in the hundreds, which means that the Israeli army has been confirmed as a leading participant in what the Biden administration, what Vice President Kamala Harris called the worst atrocity against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And Israel's whole mission, its reason to exist, is supposed to be to keep Jews safe. And here they are, killing more Jews than any other anti-Semite in recent history, and doing it deliberately for political reasons. I mean, they created, according to this, I mean, there was some new stuff in this Haaretz piece that I didn't know about that, was fairly clear to me, although a lot of it just overlapped with what I had already pulled out of, Hebrew language reports that were on the public record. One of them was that the Israelis created a free fire zone where nothing was allowed to pass by blanketing this area in the frontier between southern Israel and the Gaza Strip with artillery. I didn't know they were using massive amounts of artillery, but you can assume that those cars that got roasted that you see there, many of them were hit with artillery. I mean, 155 millimeter howitzer shells, that can kill a lot of people. So I don't think it was just in the tens. We do know, I mean, they killed 12 Israeli citizens with one tank shell who were huddled in a house, who were being held captive by Hamas militants who were trying to negotiate their way out. Rather than negotiate, one of the top generals in the Israeli army, Brigadier General Barak Hiram, someone who's being put up for a promotion to lead the Gaza division, he ordered the tank to fire into the house to kill everyone, including children, including Jewish Israeli children. And as we reported at the Grayzone, Israeli propagandists and officials went out and said, oh, these cute twins, the Hetzroni twins who were 12 years old, were murdered by Hamas. But it turned out they were deliberately killed by the Israeli army so they wouldn't have to cut a deal with their Hamas captors.
So now, do the people in Israel care about this?
I don't think it's at the top of their priority list right now because they're focused, they're divided on whether the hostages should be saved or whether Israel should just continue committing genocide forever. And this does relate to the issue of the Hannibal Directive, because actually the niece of one of the hostages who's being held in Gaza, I think his name is Ofer Calderon, she went on Israeli national TV and said that the Israeli government is applying the Hannibal Directive now, after October 7th, to kill the hostages that are being held in Gaza so they don't have to negotiate for their release. Because once they're gone, Hamas has no political leverage, then Israel just, can call it a day. And there are hostages in Gaza and captives, prisoners of war who are soldiers who were captured, who are American citizens. So my colleague Sam Husseini went to the State Department, journalist Sam Husseini, and he asked Tony Blinken's flack, Matthew Miller, popularly known as Smirkula, asked him, what do you think about Israel applying the Hannibal Directive? Do you think it's possible they could actually kill American captives in Gaza? This should be something the State Department should answer for. This was just over a week ago. Matthew Miller's response, I haven't heard of the Hannibal Directive. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, here, I think I have that. Let me play that.
Yeah, this is it.
You talk about the hostages. Israel has a Hannibal Directive in which it has orders in place to kill at least its own soldiers, lest they fall into the hands of Palestinian groups. And there's substantial reporting that in fact, was utilized on October 7th, not just against Israeli soldiers, but against civilians. Are we not now in a situation where Israel may be using the Hannibal Directive, not just on Israelis, civilians and military, but on U.S. citizens and other foreign nationals?
So I am not familiar in any way with either that supposed directive or those reports. And so
you've never heard of the Hannibal?
Certainly would not want to comment on it.
You've never heard of the Hannibal
John,
Directive?
I thought you wanted to go out of the region.
Sure.
And I guess Goebbels never heard of propaganda either. And I mean, that guy Miller is the Hannibal Directive in human form. He listens to the question, but all he hears is what's for dinner. Go ahead, Max. You want to say something?
No.
They say they love Israel. All these U.S. officials say they love Israel, but they don't know anything about that, which makes sense, actually.
I guess just knowing people who've been in the State Department or had any proximity to Miller, they say he and the whole staff, they know nothing about this subject. And they just do what they're told because they're all hoping for big jobs after the administration's over. But I mean, this is one of the biggest scandals. This is one of the biggest scandals of this heinous, almost 9-month-old war. And the mainstream U.S. media, the only time they've touched it is to attack us at the Grayzone or to attack Electronic Intifada and others who've brought up this reality, which is now just completely corroborated.
So here's a tweet from you. Who's Kenneth Roth?
Ken Roth was the longtime leader of Human Rights Watch, the leading arm of the human rights industrial complex, and a major humanitarian interventionist who has advanced war and regime change against Russia, everywhere from Russia to Bolivia to Venezuela to Syria. And now he's sort of independent. And Ken Roth is, somewhat critical of Israel. So he's trying to criticize Israel here, or he's linking to the Haaretz report in the tweet that I'm responding to. So he's linking to the report about the Hannibal Directive, and I'm bringing up the fact that when that Haaretz smear came out against me back in November, when it wasn't popular to talk about this, he smeared me, and you can read what he said there.
Here's what he says. He says the far left makes a big mistake to deny or downplay Hamas's atrocities. Israel's bombardment and besiegement of Palestinian civilians in Gaza are awful on their own terms. Whitewashing Hamas's war crimes is wrong, unnecessary, and unhelpful. So he was accusing you of doing that, of whitewashing Hamas's crimes, right? And so you tweeted out, you go, great job acknowledging that what I reported 8 months ago was true. Any plans to delete this tweet smearing me for my factual reporting on October 7th and to apologize for it? No. No. Is the answer no?
I mean, he's never responded to me, but I'm getting more engagement on that tweet than his original tweet got, because people realize who these frauds are, and that the timing here is so important, because what Israel was trying to do by inflating the death toll on October 7th was to give itself more political space to destroy all of Gaza, kill a large percentage of the population, and commit genocide. And so it was so important to counter their bogus narrative about October 7th right away. And when I did so, and when others did so, we came under massive attack, not only from the usual suspects in the corporate media, but from people like former Human Rights Watch director Ken Roth. And now they need to be called out for it. There needs to be accountability, because they were complicit in helping Israel make the case for genocide.
So let me just read a little bit of the Haaretz report. Communication networks could not keep up with the flow of information, this is on October 7th, as was the case for soldiers sending these reports. However, the message conveyed at 11:22 a.m. across the Gaza Division network was understood by everyone. Not a single vehicle can return to Gaza was the order. That means wipe out all those civilians, right? Okay. Documents obtained by Haaretz, as well as testimonies of soldiers, mid-level and senior IDF officers, reveal a host of orders and procedures laid down by the Gaza Division, Southern Command, and the IDF General Staff up to the afternoon hours of that day, showing how widespread this procedure was from the first hours following the attack and at various points along the border. So they were just slaughtering people all over the place and widespread everywhere they went. Their own people. Gaza Division operations and airstrikes in the first hours of October 7th were based on limited information. The first long moments after the Hamas attack was launched were chaotic. Reports were coming in with their significance not always clear. When their meaning was understood, it was realized that something horrific had taken place. Now, that refers to what the IDF did, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing that's horrific there is the Israeli army slaughtering their own soldiers and their own citizens, right?
No, what that's speaking to is the chaos that enveloped the extremely overhyped, overrated Israeli military, which was suffering possibly the worst defeat in its history, getting overrun by a band of besieged militants on Chinese motorbikes. And so their reaction was completely out of proportion, and they had no idea how to hold anything off. They didn't wind up pulling themselves together till later that afternoon, and the Hamas attack began at 6 a.m. Israel's intelligence failed. It's military
but on
failed.
Purpose. But I mean, we've covered this on this show that, well, and you've covered it too, that they had the plans that Hamas used. They had them a year ahead of time. They were, and Hamas followed those plans almost to the letter. And so Israel was aware. They took away, they should have never okayed that festival because the security people on the ground didn't. They denied it, and then they got overruled. Said, yeah, let them have that festival, even though they knew there was an attack coming, all this stuff. And they took away their soldiers from where they should have been to protect them. So this was a setup. I'll say it. A lot of people won't. This was a setup by Netanyahu and the Israeli army to almost encourage this to happen by putting that festival there, and then by slaughtering the people after the attack started. So this was so they could use this as a reason to go in and carpet bomb Gaza and now everywhere else in Palestine. That's what it seems very clear to me. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't agree with the theory that Israel deliberately made a decision at high levels to allow this to take place. I think that they're just their intelligence, military intelligence apparatus is extremely overrated, overhyped. They're kind of a paper tiger. What they're doing to Gaza is completely dependent on air power and 2,000-pound, 500-pound bombs supplied by the U.S. as well as tech. But if that stopped coming, Israel would have to evacuate its entire population tomorrow. It's not like a real, it's not the military it's cracked up to be, is what I'm saying. Its intelligence was extremely shoddy. And there were reports, of course, that we know about now. But I also think that Israel's military leadership and its political leadership has not achieved their objectives in Gaza. They've failed. Israel is in a very dangerous existential crisis right now, not just militarily or politically, but economically. Foreign investment is not coming in for its tech sector, which sustains its whole middle class. So I don't think that this was something that they would allow to happen. I mean, I'm also not a 9/11 truther, but the 9/11 attacks did work out better for the neoconservatives and the U.S. security state than October 7th has kind of worked out. The response to October 7th has worked out for the Israelis. And I also think it underestimates the capacity of Hamas to stage an attack like this. I don't think anyone would have expected it to have succeeded. For Hamas, they killed close to 400 Israeli soldiers. And that was staggering for the Israeli military. So, yeah, I mean, and since then, we've witnessed so many deceptions, so many lies. I mean, basically, when an Israeli propagandist is talking, you can assume they're lying. And so who's to believe that anything they say is real about October 7th? Like, I understand why people are developing these theories.
If I was privy to Ben Swann, so we featured it on the show. Ben Swann did some great reporting. Investigative reporting using all reports from Jewish newspapers, Israeli newspapers, and sources, and it's very clear that this was at the very least allowed to happen by Israel's army and Netanyahu. And so it's very, very clear. I don't know if maybe you haven't seen that reporting, but it is fantastic. There's a video up on our channel covering it. You can go to Ben Swann's website. Anyway, yeah, it's very clear. But this is so you've been vindicated, right? And but Haaretz is not going to ever again. Oh, you always are, right? But so Haaretz is not going to apologize to you, nor is that other guy who now works for the Human Rights Watch, and you're not.
Yeah, the Washington Post. I mean, Washington Post ran a full-page feature attacking the Grayzone, accusing us of spreading misinformation. Not just that, of violating Iran sanctions, trying to get our editor Wyatt Reed jailed, literally thrown in prison, because as he publicly stated at the time, he was doing producing for Press TV. So they went to that level because of the reporting we've been doing since October 7th. And, you know, all the sources quoted in that piece are basically US intelligence cutouts or Israeli intelligence cutouts. They're not going to apologize because this is their agenda, to spread misinformation, to muddy the waters, and to prevent us from having a clear understanding of some of the biggest scandals of our time. It's like one of the biggest scandals of our time that we talked about for years on your show, Jimmy, was Russiagate.
Yeah.
Not that there was a Trump-Russia connection, but that this connection was concocted in order to take us to war. Us, the United States, is now directly involved in war with Russia. And that's partly a result of the manufacturing of a consensus that Russia needed to be attacked because they were destroying our democracy. It's the same thing with these lies that Israel spun out after October 7th. And one of those first lies was they inflated the October 7th death toll. Now, I'm not saying that Hamas or Palestinian militants didn't commit atrocities on October 7th, like shooting civilians, for example, or kidnapping people. Well, that's all confirmed. And it was a military attack, a special forces style attack, mostly on military bases. People get killed, but Israel couldn't sell what it wanted to do in Gaza, full-on genocide, ethnic cleansing, with just the facts that were clearly established with video. So they concocted mass rape, beheaded babies, fetuses cut from women, but it all started with first exaggerating the death toll. And they first said it was 1,400. And I think I was one of the first people, at least with a platform in the English language, to say that many of those that they initially counted were actually Palestinians. And they were disseminating photos of people who are looked burned, and they looked like they had been charred and burned alive. In fact, those were Palestinians who had infiltrated from Gaza, who were hit by Israeli Apache helicopters or Israeli artillery fire, and they were trying to pass them off as Jewish Israelis. Israel, months later, lowered its death toll to 1,200. But if we consider that 400 at least of those were Israeli soldiers who are combatants in uniform enforcing the siege of Gaza, not innocent civilians, and now we consider that hundreds were Israeli citizens killed by the Israeli army, it doesn't look like this second Holocaust that they tried to sell it as. And so they have to constantly muddy the waters and attack anyone who dares to talk about the Hannibal Directive. And now it's like 9 months later, Gaza's destroyed. It's too late. So now Israeli media can really talk about it. And I bet you, U.S. media will start to, the New York Times will have some discussion about it, like in the fog of war.
Yeah.
And they'll use the passive voice. And then they'll say, we did it. We finally covered it. By the time they do it, the damage is done.
That's right. So they wanted to inflate all the numbers. They wanted to make it more horrific. They wanted to spread the propaganda so they could have the political capital to go in and do this mass slaughter that they're doing. And now I guess that they've done most of it. I guess it's okay for Haaretz to start reporting the truth. Is that what it looks like to you?
Obviously.
Yeah.
Why did they do it before? It's just the way that the Western mainstream media works. I mean, you can look at any major issue today, like Joe Biden's dementia. Now it's okay for the New York Times to do real reporting because no one can deny the dementia, and Joe Biden is a threat to anyone who believes that the most important thing in the world is to stop the new Hitler, Donald Trump, from taking office. So the New York Times can report that the Biden White House has been feeding questions to journalists who want to interview Biden, that the journalists have to agree to ask the questions the White House wants. Now they can report a Parkinson's doctor has been visiting the White House. But if Biden had performed well in the debate, they wouldn't have done that real reporting because their whole agenda is to back up the political consensus, the transatlantic political consensus. And part of that is that Israel has a quote unquote right to defend itself as it occupies indigenous people, tortures them and slaughters them. So they slaughtered them. They got away with it. Now it's okay. We can talk about this scandal.
Max Blumenthal from the Grayzone. Great job. I'm glad to see you vindicated once again. And you know, I mean, this is the life you've chosen, Max. I mean, let's be honest.
Well, I'm sure you know the feeling too.
Yes, of course.
Again and again and again.
Yes, everybody should check out the Grayzone. They do great reporting. Grayzone.com. Max, thanks for coming on. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks a lot, Jimmy.
Okay.
Really appreciate it.
All right, buddy.
All right, good seeing you.
Hey, I'll see you on tour in Las Vegas, Chicago, and Grand Rapids. In Chicago, it's stand-up and a live panel show. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and make sure you go to jimmydore.com.